All right. Welcome everybody back to Scar Stories. I should know my own title. Scar Stories. This is episode 2. And I am so excited about this episode. I should probably introduce myself first. I'm new to this whole thing, but my name is Nicole Golden. I'm host of Scar Stories. And one of the reasons why I created this podcast is because I'm a big advocate of mental health. That's different than being an advocate of mental illness. We all have mental health and we all need to be taking care of our mental health and monitoring it. And so what I wanted to do with this podcast is just get a bunch of my friends together who have a bunch of different stories. And I just want them to share their stories because I think of it this way, like when you're a little kid and you have like an epic fall off of a bike or out of a tree or something, and you have this really awesome scar that carries this really awesome story. And that's kind of what it's like with our brokenness. When we walk through a difficult season, we end up with these scars that then we can choose to tell the story. But what's so unique about scars is that there are scars. And so we get to decide when we want to share and how we want to share. And so with each of my guests, I send them questions ahead of time, but I wanted to say this publicly. I always tell them if, I ask a question or if we start moving into a conversation that is uncomfortable or that is a trigger or that just would not be safe for themselves or whoever they're talking about in that particular situation, then we just skip right over that. So Hope and I have talked about that already because she's going to be sharing some really deep stuff. And so I just wanted to let you all know that if that happens, that's not anything we're going to get weirded out about. It's just like, okay, let's move on. Because my biggest priority is making sure that I'm loving on and taking care of the people that I interview. So Hope Griffin, we are so happy you are here. She is the author of Finding Joy. And now, is your husband retired military? Is he still active? Okay.
He's retired.
Retired military spouse. And we're going to be talking about PTSD today. And I don't know if it's good to say I'm excited to talk about this. I guess I feel like PTSD is something that's thrown around, like people throw it around and sometimes we say it jokingly, like I went to Disney and there was rain and long lines. Now I have PTSD, do you know what I'm saying? It's so irreverent, but we throw it around and we think we know what it means. And this is me included. I don't know that I've ever sat down with someone and just had a discussion about, okay, what is this? What does this look like? How does this affect the people closest? So I'm actually, I guess, excited, anticipatory. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, all right. So Hope, tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to know, first of all, how long have you guys been married? And then how long was he in the military? How many kids you have? Kind of give us a little bit of, bio so we kind of have an idea of who you are before we get into the really deep stuff.
Sure. So we met in 2000, so it's really easy to start there and say we've known each other for 20 years.
Nice.
We got married 2 years later. So
okay.
We've been married, that's 18 years, I think.
Yes.
Math isn't my strong suit. Okay.
It's not mine either. That's why I wasn't going to be like 18 years and then it's like 19 or 20.
That's why it's nice that we met in 2000.
I know. Yes.
But so he was in the military before I knew him for a short stint, and he was injured. And then he was a police officer for a while.
Okay.
Also before I met him.
Okay.
I met him while he was a cook and a waiter at the Olive Garden.
A much different change of pace.
I did not know what I was signing up for.
I love it. You're like, you just work at Olive Garden. What kind of past can you have? Right.
So he re-enlisted in 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, 2008, which was a complete surprise for me. I always thought he'd come home and be like, I want to be a police officer again. I didn't expect military.
Yeah.
We were married. We've been married almost 7 years when he left. And then, he stayed until 2018, October 2018, which is when we moved here to Brandon.
Okay.
So he was in for 10 years while I knew him, but he has 12 years service.
Geez. Okay. And you have 3 kids, correct?
Yes.
Two
Yes.
girls and 1 boy.
Yes.
And their ages are?
The oldest is in high school and the girls are in middle school.
Are they twins?
No.
The girls? Okay.
Yeah. I have a 6th and an 8th grader.
Okay. Jeez. That I am not looking forward to the middle school years. And I'm just thanking God that I only have 1 girl to have to take through the middle school years. But then, of course, I don't know about having to deal with 3 boys through middle school either. So Jesus, take the wheel. I'm just wanting
They're all
to.
emotional.
Yeah,
Middle
I'm
school
like,
is it's just emotions.
like, just put me in a coma and wake me up on the other side. So I'm guessing, and again, this is for me, this is a lot of new information, but he received an actual PTSD diagnosis, your husband?
He did after his second deployment in 2016, and then he was medically retired in part due to PTS in 2018.
Okay. And so talk to us a little bit about what was happening leading up to the diagnosis. Like, and I think this is really cool, and I'm so glad she did this. Hope talked about this whole interview with her husband. So anything that we're sharing, everybody has been in agreement that this is cool to share. So I really appreciate him for allowing us to be able to talk about this, because we have a huge military audience, and I think sometimes spouses, and because we have, a number of husbands whose wives are deployed and wives whose husbands are deployed and vice versa. And so I think sometimes, and we aren't going to get into any of the nitty gritty of how it happened or anything like that, but I think sometimes the spouses know what their husband or wife has faced and they're coming back, and it's just, what do I do? How are we going to walk through this? And so can you kind of give us a little bit of the background kind of leading up to the diagnosis? Like, did you see that something was wrong? Were you kind of the one that pushed him there? Did he take himself? What was that like?
Well, after he came back from his first deployment, I could tell something was very different about him. He'd always been really engaged before with the family and really kind to strangers and like shirt off his own back kind of person. And when he came back and from the first deployment, he would lose track of his thoughts in the middle of a sentence. He'd forget beyond just normal, I'm not paying attention to my wife.
Yeah.
He'd actually forget things. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And he was more reserved. He wouldn't talk. Mostly it was just the pulling away. He didn't ever want to go anywhere. He didn't want to go. You always hear they don't like crowded spaces.
Yeah.
You need to know the exit strategy in every room you're in. So it was just different. And so I finally asked him to get help and figure out what was going on. And at that time, he was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury, a TBI. And they are very similar, TBI and PTSD, in their symptoms. There's a lot of overlap. So it can be very difficult to know the difference. Which he has both now.
Like, yay for him.
I'm sure that was PTSD back then, or if it was just the TBI. But that's when things really, he was a different person. And then when he came back from the second deployment, he was even more different. He was more withdrawn. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to be around other children very much, or our kids needed to be more quiet, that kind of thing. It just wasn't him. It wasn't the guy I married. So,
and I can only imagine how helpless you must have felt. I mean, I'm obviously Bryant's not in the military, so I want to ask this as a military spouse, like, when your husband is deployed and when he comes back, are you prepared? Like, were you mentally prepared that there was a chance he was going to come back different? Were you mentally prepared for, I'm going to have to hear what he's seen and what's happened and were you at all prepared for that?
Yes and no.
So
his first deployment, going into the military, I was like, what are we doing? Like, I was like a borderline pacifist. And now I wanted to be a missionary to India, like Amy Carmichael, and save the world. And So I was kind of like, what? So I binge watched Army Wives while he was at basic training. Bad idea.
I love it. It's hilarious. I'm like, how real was Army Wives? Like, how, like, you know?
It's pretty good.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch it. That was a long time ago.
I'm dying that was like your preparatory, like, that is hilarious.
It's a little extreme, Army Wives is.
Yeah.
Military spouses face a lot of the same things regular spouses do, except for their husband or their wife is gone for months, like a year, even more sometimes, and you can't even talk to him.
Yeah.
So you've got to figure it out on your own. And then when they come home, you have to figure out a way to remerge and like reintegrate. Reintegrate's the big word. Reintegrate them into the family. And that I have found has been the most difficult part. What was the question? I feel like I got off.
No, you're fine. We got distracted by Army Wives. I said, were you mentally prepared? Like, were you,
Right.
Yeah, were you, like, had you kind of talked yourself in, like, there's a chance we may be walking through this, or was this kind of blindsided for you?
So I'm a big nerd. So during the first deployment, I took a counseling certification class on stress and trauma care in the military community.
Okay, specifically to be able to help your husband, or more to help you, or both?
More so that I can understand, because I know you're not supposed to be the counselor for your own spouse.
Yeah.
That's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But I was also working in a church in a ministry leadership position with a lot of military in the church.
Yeah,
so it's kind of I'm going to do this for them and for me.
Yes.
So it helped me identify that there was a problem when he did come back, because I knew the symptoms of a TBI and PTSD. I just had no idea what it was. So I was prepared with the terminology when he came back, but I wasn't prepared for what it felt like.
Yeah.
And the Army, I don't feel they tried, but we're all so different. How do you prepare someone for that? Like, so they do a good job of preparing you to help other people, and they encourage you to be resilient and bounce like a ball. I hate that term. Bounce like a ball. I don't want to bounce like a ball.
No.
But so I tried, and then I used writing as my own therapy, which is how I ended up with the book Finding Joy. It's journal entries that I turned into a book.
I can't wait to get it and read it.
Yeah, it's a course of the 2 deployments, like smashed into one.
And I, like, any military spouses that we maybe have listening to this, like, I would really encourage you to pick up that book and read it, because I think one of the things that I have picked up from having so many people, like, we're if you're watching us from out of state or out of the area, we're very close to MacDill Air Force Base, which is the center for CENTCOM, SOCOM. Anything major happening over there is happening in there, and so we have so many military men and women who attend our church. And one of the things I hear a lot from the spouses is just how lonely it is. Like, you're jumping around from state to state, base to base. You have to constantly be making new friends. You never know how long you're going to be there. And then, also caring for the person that you fell in love with, who's now come back and is someone totally different. And then you've got to help your children walk through that. And so, I mean, what was that like for you? Like, was this something that you were very honest with your children? Because, like, I'm guessing when he got his diagnosis, how old were the kids? I'm not going to do the math. I'm going to let you do it. I'm just going to sit here and watch you.
I think my oldest was 11.
Okay. So is that something you guys, like, sat them down then and was like, here's what's happening? Or how did you handle that with the kids?
Not that well.
Okay.
They could tell he was different. And it just got quiet in our house for a long time. Not that well. Over time, we have a rule in our house. If you ask a question, I'm going to tell you the answer. So if I think you're not ready for the answer, or I'm curious, I'm like, this will change your life as you know it. Yeah. And now they believe me when I say it, because they've asked enough of those awkward questions where I'm like, okay, this goes there and that goes there.
Like, we weren't ready. We weren't ready.
They're like, no. So my youngest, every now and then, will ask me a question. And I'll say, are you ready? And she just looks at me with fear in her eyes and is like, no.
And then like runs to the next room. You're like, okay, that answers that. So did they ask like what's wrong with daddy? Like, did they ask those questions?
They did. So John was injured in combat. Which is part of the reason for the TBI. His job was to look for IEDs. Wait.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my
I get all my acronyms mixed up. So he drove over a few.
Oh my gosh. You know that was his job?
Yes. To a certain degree. Like, he kept a lot from me of what his actual job was until he got back.
Oh my gosh. I just can't imagine.
Yeah. So he came back with major spinal issues because of the impact. So he has chronic pain now. And so a lot of what we addressed with the kids at first, because John and I didn't understand what was going on in his own head. Was daddy's a little grumpy and tired today because he's hurting. So once we started to be honest about the pain that he was in, it was easier as a family to manage. And that was part of the process, was first just naming what the pain was. And look, my neck really hurts today, or my back really hurts today and I have to lay down. It's not you. I just need space.
Yes.
And telling the kids that too, because at first we weren't telling them that. The same thing with the PTS. When John realized it was going on, he didn't want to share. Because he was trying to protect us. In the same way we were trying to protect the kids from being scared that their dad wasn't Superman. All we were doing was making it more confusing for them. So
and I wonder too, like, if John and if you're not comfortable answering this for him, then we can pop right over this. But if he didn't already feel, you know, he wasn't, but if he didn't already feel like a burden because he had been deployed and now he's coming back with injuries, and now on top of that, here's this, you know, diagnosis that he never wanted or asked for. It was just unfortunately a part of the job. And so I don't know, you know, is that one reason why he didn't want to bring it up and talk about it? Did he just kind of feel like a burden and just have guilt over that?
And he's also a protector. Like, I mean, just look at his past jobs. He was
exactly
a soldier and a police officer, and a foodie, but that's different.
I love it.
But yeah, he's a protector, and so he was trying to protect us and keep his two worlds separate. He wanted a soft, kind family life, and then to not be impacted by war. But the problem is, if you're in that family, whether you talk about it or not, your family is impacted by what you go through. So war was impacting our family. We just didn't understand what it was, like why it was impacting us.
And how it was being brought in. Dang. I really appreciate you sharing all this.
My poor husband, I'm a writer. And I write, well, you experience this, right? Bryant talks about you all the time.
Yes. Yeah, and you know what, there's like, you get to a point where I think like, and you said it, where you have to own what's happened. You know what I'm saying? I think sometimes there's this season of, you know, and I want to ask you in a second, because you keep saying PTS, you don't say the D. So I want to ask you why you're not doing that in just a second. But when are you meaning to not do that?
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask about that in a second. I want to ask about that in a second. I'm going to write that down so I don't forget, because I feel like you and I we're like squirrel and we're all over the place. Hopefully this one doesn't end up being 2 hours. But, you know, I feel like when you're walking through a season of brokenness, and one of the things that I'm trying to do a lot is like talk about brokenness, because not all of us have mental illness, all of us have mental health, and all of us will walk through seasons of brokenness. And so when you're walking through a season of brokenness, I think there's that defining moment where you're going to be like, you're either going to own it or you're going to keep ignoring it and fighting against it. And I think the longer you fight against your brokenness, the longer you're going to keep yourself and those who love you in turmoil, because it's not until you own it that you begin to really fight it. And it's funny, I love working out, and I love Sean T. He's with Beachbody, does like T25 and everything like that. Anyways, he's my man. He's my homie. But he talks about, there's one part, and it makes me laugh every time, but I'm like, this is so true. So like you're working out and he's big on cardio. So like literally you're like dripping sweat and like dying. And he's like, look at your biceps, look at them. Even if you don't like them, they're yours and you got to own them because this is all you got to work with. And I'm like, that is so true to life. Like you have been given what you've been given. And until you stop and look at it and own it, like that's your life. And you've got to own it and then begin to be like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And so I love that you said like you guys had to actually name the source of the pain and you had to figure out what was happening. And then, because I think sometimes too, especially when it does come to any kind of illness. And as we've started this, I've had a lot of people talk to me about chronic pain. That's a big thing in our world now, like, but chronic pain, chronic illness, mental illness. I think sometimes until we're brave enough to actually own that it is something happening to us, we think it is us. And then our families and stuff get confused because they think it's us talking and it's not the illness, you know? And I think one of the things I'll never forget when I got my diagnosis with borderline, we had already figured out about the anxiety, we'd already figured out about the depression. But when I got diagnosed with borderline, my counselor, Kevin, was like, I don't like labels, but do you relate to this list of symptoms? And it was the list of symptoms of borderline. And I just burst into tears because I was like, yes. And he was like, why are you crying? And I was like, because now I realize something's happening to me. This isn't me. And I can start to fight against this and heal. And I think once we get brave enough to name that something's happening to us, that's when we can start to heal because we realize it isn't us. And then when we start to have those honest conversations with our family and friends and those who love us, it helps them understand, okay, this isn't them. And as a result, it isn't me. I'm not doing anything wrong. I just have to figure out how to interact with them as they're healing. So I love that. Okay, so quick, why are you only saying PTS? Why are you not adding the D?
Okay, so I actually wrote some notes on that one.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go down there. Okay. So post-traumatic stress is not necessarily a disorder. Because it is something that, it is an injury. It is something that happened to us. So it's not a disorder. It's kind of like, so when you're raped, you can have PTS. It is post-traumatic stress from that, or having a major illness like cancer. You can have it as well. And so it hasn't changed in the terminology for medical and insurance purposes. It's still PTSD because you won't get benefits or health coverage or a disability check if it's just PTSD. You just won't. But by dropping the D, the thought is that you also drop a lot of the stigma for the soldier. And then they can see it as something that they can work against. Because as soon as you put that D there, it feels permanent. And PTS isn't always permanent. Like you always have that trauma in your past, but there are things that, there's treatments that have been effective in helping people. I think right now, 60% of individuals are seeing positive effects from the treatments and can get better. So it's not 100%.
But 60% is a big number.
He's rated 100% permanent and total disabled with the Army. And it's because of a lot of it is the PTS. So when we talk to the Army, PTSD. The forms we add the D. But when we're talking, it is in the form of like to the individual and them working through it. PTS offers more hope.
Wow. Yes, 100%.
Thing. It's one letter. But it changes the dialogue.
Yes. Because I think, would you agree? And if this is too personal, we'll scooch past it. But I feel like when you find out someone has PTSD, people get scared. And I think of like the movie American Sniper and some of those, like that was the only movie I could stomach. I couldn't watch Lone Survivor. I can't watch those movies because I can't do it. It's too much for me emotionally. I can't imagine. Well, and it's funny because like, I can't imagine. But I think, when you start talking about someone with PTSD, you can almost see the fear on people's faces. And it's almost like are are they going to snap? Are they going to, and there's just this. So if you had to, as someone who's married to someone with PTS, I'm going to start doing that now. I love that. Have you felt the stigma of his diagnosis and of these things he's had to walk through?
Yeah, so, well, like with mental illness, with gun violence, they always tie it to mental illness. And just because you have mental illness does not mean that you're going to be violent with a gun.
Yep.
So there's all different kinds of layers with any mental illness, and PTS is one of them. So my husband is not violent towards others. And most people with this aren't violent towards others. They're more withdrawn. They seclude themselves more. They don't lash out in anger. I mean, my husband's had moments, but his moments have never been that he's just angry and just loses it. I have had friends whose husbands have become abusive, but it's not the overwhelming norm. This happened, and it's great on the movie screen. But typically that harm is self-directed. It comes out in self-medication. It comes out in self-injury, self-harm, drinking, withdrawing, and suicide ideation. It's why we have 20 veterans a day who are committing suicide. PTS plays a lot into that. The lack of care, the lack of understanding, the lack of being willing as a community to take on that burden with them. They're told that they're sent out in their program to do this deed that none of us want to do. I don't want to do it. I don't even want to see it. I don't want to be a part of that. But that doesn't mean that when the soldier comes home, I can't love him or her and hold them up and be like, you had to do that, and I understand you did that for me, and so let me help you carry the pain of it, because nobody can carry that alone.
No.
So my biggest thing would be, if you see somebody withdrawing who has PTS, especially right now, because that's one thing too with COVID. Like, we were taking baby steps. We were working with a counselor, taking baby steps to re-engage in the community. And part of it was like, okay, so she always said, you just don't jump into the deep end, right? So you go to the mall with your spouse and you sit in the food court for an hour, and then you leave. And then a few days later you go and your wife sits in the food court and you walk around the mall by yourself. And then at some point you just get dropped off. And then at some point you go on a Saturday alone. But you go slowly. And so we were working through that, and then COVID hit and we were told to stay home all the time. So we're a little back at square one. It was great. When it was time to go grocery shopping, I would always send my husband, because he loved it, because no one could get within 6 feet of him. Everybody was scared to approach him. And now people aren't quite like that as much. And he's like, I can't go back to the store. So now it's back on me.
You're like, great, thank you.
But that's the big thing. I'm working on a novel where my two main characters both have PTS, but one is violent because he doesn't have a community around him. He is unable to process what's going on in his life, and he becomes very violent through it. The other one has a family and is pulling away, and he's able. So it's the whole point of the novel is to kind of parallel the two different extremes of that. So. But that's coming in like 2027. I don't know.
I can't wait. But I love that. But let me ask you, because you said something like and then one of the questions I had written down here, we're kind of discussing this now, is like, I think we all feel like we know what PTS is, but I don't know that we truly do. And I think that was very enlightening to me, because I think when I think of PTS, I think of violence. You know what I'm saying? Although it's funny, because I do have a couple of friends who have a diagnosis or are working towards a diagnosis, and they aren't violent at all. And so then it's like, okay, they're not violent, but they're skittish around, like you just kind of, you go through all the things that you think about it. So I want to ask you this. You said a lot of it's directed internally. Is there something to it where they are almost like punishing themselves over what they've done overseas, or they're just why is it going inside? Why are they punishing themselves? Are they just running to safety? Is that why they're moving internal, or what's the draw to moving in internal?
A lot of times for soldiers, the incident that happens, they are conditioned to react. Like all of those drills they go through, when they are in trauma, they don't think about it. You react because you're saving your life and the lives of the people around you.
Yeah.
When you remove yourself later, you have time to analyze and go over and over and over again. And sometimes the action you had to take in that moment doesn't match who you thought you were as a person.
Wow.
And
I'm like feeling this in my insides. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like war is dirty. It's full of death and pain.
Yeah.
And I wish we didn't have it. Like
yeah. That's why you're past this.
Yeah.
You're like, there's a reason why I chose this. Yeah.
So so there's one of the things we talk about a lot in counseling and is the difference between guilt and shame. Like guilt is something that if you feel it, there's something you've probably done something wrong, and you can actually, there's actions you can take, right?
Yes.
To never do it again. When you feel shame, all you're doing is hurting yourself. Like there's no room for shame. There's just no room for it. So we talk about that a lot, and we have to identify things that we believe about ourselves to be true that are not true.
Yeah.
And that's part of that process, because you aren't the person who experienced that moment. That is a moment in time of trauma. Just like when you're raped, you're not that person.
Yeah.
It's something that it happened in that moment. And I feel like I should have said trigger warning before I said that word.
Yeah, no, that's fine. This is gonna upload on Monday, so I'll post trigger on it. And
okay,
yeah,
we'll be fine.
Do not feel bad.
Trigger warning first.
Do not feel bad. We'll put up all sorts of trigger warnings for this one for sure.
Okay, great.
You're fine.
Okay, so yeah, you have to come to terms, like it was a moment in time, and you just have to come to terms with the fact that it just is. Like, yeah, it just is. Like, there's so many different variants that played into it. And shame has you have to let that go. You have to find a way to let the shame go.
I remember, and we have to wrap this up soon, but there are so many rabbit trails. This is what happened with my first one with Lauren too. I'm like, we'll have to have part 2 with Lauren and part 2 with Hope. But I remember after my brother committed suicide last year, and that had been after a long journey of me walking with him and having to deal with very angry phone calls at times. And then also he got cancer, and then he was in rehab, and they were keeping a lot of it secret for a while, just due to his position being a pastor and that sort of a thing. And so we were getting friends calling and like, what's going on and all this other stuff. And so it had just been a year or two of just crazy turmoil with him. And I remember after he committed suicide, just subconsciously trying to make it my fault. And so I was talking to Kevin about it. I was like, why am I constantly trying to look for this to be my fault? Like, why am I looking for all the reasons why, I missed this phone call or I didn't do this? Because I couldn't think of it, all the things that I had done. I could only think of all the times I got annoyed with him, and which most of those times happened in the few months right before he died, which is like the worst time for those to happen. But I was just so annoyed with him for that season right before he died. And now looking back, it makes me sick to my stomach. And so Kevin explained to me, he's like, your subconscious is trying to find a way to make it your fault, because that's easier to understand than to think he just did this because he wanted it, And it's so crazy sometimes, and I don't know with someone with PTS, or I don't want to speak as someone who's been deployed, because I just can't wrap my mind around that. I can't either. but just to think like what their subconscious must be working overtime to do to make what they saw and experience like easier to digest. Do you know what I'm saying? And so anyways, that's the emoji I have right now in my head, just craziness.
Well, I think as Americans, especially Christian Americans, we believe there's a reason for everything. And we need to have a reason for everything. And sometimes there's just not. Sometimes there's just pain. Like the Dread Pirate Robinson, who said, life is pain, and anyone who tells you differently is selling you something, right?
Love it. Yeah, that's it.
It is. It's just, there's pain in this life. We suffer. That's why Christ came as the suffering Christ.
Yes.
And he can relate to us.
Yes.
And I think there's something beautiful about being broken.
Yeah.
And scars that, like Christ had his scars after resurrection.
Yes.
And I think that,
I love that.
somehow our scars do make our story. And I don't think we're going to lose them completely.
No.
Because they're who we are.
Yes.
So.
And they're what has pushed a lot of us to the cross, and so I think one of the things, as you were talking, we can end with this, but if you haven't read this, I'm going to be surprised because you touched on so many things. Have you read Daring Greatly by Brené Brown?
Yes, I love Brené Brown.
Okay, I was going to say, because a lot of things you're saying, I'm like, that's like right out of this book. And if those of you who are listening have never read that book, oh my gosh, drop everything and go get it. It's deep. And my husband's reading it right now. And I told him, because I was like, my husband and I, like, as we read stuff, we like to like organize it in our brain. And she's very scholastic. So it's like she breaks something down, then she breaks that down, then breaks that down, but then goes back to what she broke down to break it down a different way. And you can get lost in it somewhat. My brain just doesn't work that way. I'm like, give me the top 3 points. And then, but one of the parts in there, do you remember where she was talking about how, especially with military men and women, we drill into them, like, just do your job, hold it all together. Like, we're putting them in situations where they can't come unraveled emotionally. They have to think logically. They have to separate themselves. They have to think, and so we drill that into them, and then they come back into real life, and we're like, okay, feel, emote, talk, and now you don't have to hold it all together. And they're just, do you remember that part in the book? I thought that was just
it's so a survival mechanism to keep it all in. Like, you have to keep it all in to stay mission focused. And then you come home and you have a 2, a 4, a 6-year-old, and you have to take out the trash and fix the broken car. And a week ago you were like fighting the enemy and life and death.
Because I know, like, when Bryant's hurting, okay, we'll end with this. We only have like 10 minutes and we will be at like an hour. We have to end at this. I know, like, when Bryant is hurting, or when he's, like when he lost his mom last year, like, I feel like we both lost a best friend, but like his mom was his, and I'm not like, I'm his wife. I know he loves me. I'm his woman, but like his mom was his mom,
Right.
And I was going through the pain of losing her, but I think more on top of that was watching him go through the pain of losing her. And so, and just knowing I couldn't make it better because I couldn't bring her back. And even now, like, that's so hard. Like, we were just talking about the other day, and I was like, I know what she did for you and how she just encouraged you and was such a cheerleader. And like, I'm trying, but I will never fill that void because that's just who she was,
Yeah.
So that's a very, like, I'm not trying to compare that to what you walk through. I'm just saying, in my week, like, this is as close as I can get to understanding. So for you, what has that been? Have you tried to understand what he's seen and what he's experienced? You're like, I just can't even go there emotionally. Like, how have you tried to enter into this with him, or is it healthier not to? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, is it healthier to just kind of be on the outside and be a coach, or to walk through this with him? Do you need to enter into the pain? What do you do with that? And I did not ask you this question ahead of time, so
that's fine.
If this is too much.
No, this is something I've really thought a lot about. Because we're married and we are one. Like, in the beginning, I told him, if you feel like you need to share it, then share it.
Yeah.
But it's become, I need him to share it. Because for us to be united, I need to know. Like, I don't have to know all the details, but I need to know the emotions around it. I need to know the why you're pulling away from me. I need to know enough details that we can say we're standing and fighting this on a united front.
Yes. On a united front. That's true too, I'm sure, sometimes.
Yeah, because if I'm excluded, then we're not really one. We're not a team. And that's all I ever want from my marriage is I want to be a team. And it's taken us both a long time to understand how to communicate in that way.
Yeah.
And for me to give him the grace he needs to share things, and for him to trust that he can share them with me. And that there's just this fear that I will judge him. And there are moments where it's an internal struggle because that's not who he is. That wasn't who he is. That's not who I am. But then just understanding that I think that PTS in a way is because we are human.
Yeah.
If there was no response to trauma that's just painful, then we'd all just be monsters. Now, I don't say that if you don't have PTS that you're a monster. No.
Right.
You probably have healthy coping mechanisms that you have learned, and I am proud of you. I'm not saying you're a monster. I'm saying the fact that PTS exists at all is proof that humans are good, because we can't just look at trauma as a whole and be like, no, that's fine.
Yeah. We're made in the image of our Creator, and our Creator is a just God who fights for people and loves people and wants to take care of them. And so okay, last question. I'm like Bryant on Sundays. We're winding down. Woo! When he's withdrawing, is that because what you said, he feels like you're going to judge if he's being honest, or is this okay to ask? Or is he just thinking you're not going to be able to connect, or does he just not even have the emotional energy to even try? Like what?
I think it's a combination of all of those. Just exhaustion of having to face it one more time. And just not wanting to be a burden. And he's not a burden. I love him fiercely. Like, John, if you're watching this, you are not a burden. I've now said it publicly.
Yes. You can record this and show her again. Yeah.
But But I mean, when I get sick, I know as a mom, and if I'm sick and I spend all day in bed, I start to feel guilty.
Yeah.
Because, so it's that intensified, I think.
I was going to say that.
My life would be awful without him in it. Like,
yes, 100%. Well, I had the worst anxiety attack I've ever had. Not ever had. I don't know why I'm being so dramatic. Worst anxiety attack I've had in several years the other day. And I just remember usually for me, it'll last for a couple of hours. And by anxiety for me, it's weird. I'll have to do a whole podcast just on like what my anxiety looks like. But it's like, I'm not functioning in reality at all. I feel like I'm spiraling, and I can't, like, Brian will ask me afterwards, sometimes even in the middle of it, like, can you see how this is not a big deal? And he's not being heartless. He's trying to figure out, am I operating in reality or am I not? And specifically with borderline, if you're having an episode, it's hard to explain, but it's almost like an out-of-body experience. Like, I know intellectually that how I'm spiraling makes no sense and shouldn't be, but I can't take myself out of that situation. You have to give me a couple of hours for everything to settle down. And then I can look back at it and be like, dang, like I wasn't functioning in reality at all, but I can't in that moment. And so I just know, and it was so funny, Bryant won't care because we laugh at this all the time, but when I was spiraling, he was in the car and he's like, well, just stop it. And you would think after 10 years, he would know, like, you can't tell someone who's having anxiety. He was just like, just stop then, just stop it. Yeah. And so I was talking to him last night and he was like, I know. And he gets frustrated with himself because he's like, I should know after 10 years that you can't just stop it, But then I was telling him, I was like, I hate it because I know this isn't what you signed up for. And I know how much emotional energy this takes for you. And yeah, as the person who has whatever diagnosis it is, you feel bad because you know that's not what that person signed up for. But I think sometimes just even hearing him say like, no, like, he sees what Jesus is doing with my diagnosis. He sees how Jesus is using us to be a voice. And so just him sharing that with me and helping reframe it, like, yeah, he's not dismissing the fact that it's hard for him. But at the same point, like, he realizes that this has almost been, I think you kind of referred to it, like, it's beautiful. It's almost a gift that you can use then to love on other people and be like, you are not alone in this, Yeah.
But it's okay to just say it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's okay to just be there. It sucks.
Yeah. And not scream, stop it. Stop it. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Brian Golden, if you're watching this, because he will, he will. But anyways, well, listen, I'm going to stop us there then, because literally we could go for another 2 or 3 hours.
No.
But I really appreciate your time.
That'd be fun with me. This is fun.
I know, isn't it fun? We'll do this again. We'll do this again.
Okay.
Because I think it would be fun to do it again. But they can find Finding Joy where? Amazon, anywhere books are sold.
Yes, or they can just contact me and
Okay. And you have a whole blog.
See, I have a.
I know, I was looking at it back there. Where, what's your blog? Is it just hopegriffin.com, or what's your, where can they find your website?
It's hopeinGriffin.com.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
That's
and then name. You're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. So look her up. I know she's going to bless you. And you do, I was looking at your website a little bit. You do a lot of like stuff on like blogging and writing and stuff like that too. So if you are interested in that, she's a great resource. So anyways,
that's how I support the family.
I love it. Hope, you are a rock star. Thank you for being so honest. Thank John for us. John, if you're watching, mwah, thank you. I know you're being a huge encouragement. So anyways, thanks for joining us for Scar Stories, you guys, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.